Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
She is a beauty, beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country.
Globespan believes every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
With many flavors, 6 different people blended together. Raise your flag high in unity, we're family with one destiny. Raise your flag high in unity.
Good evening, Globespanners, and it's a real delight to be hosted this evening in the home of Ralph Ramkarran, our inaugural guest of the nation building, Guyana Beyond 2030. Ralph, thanks for having me in your home this evening.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, Ralph, I wanted to explain to the audience what we're doing with the new series. 2030 is a big year for Guyana. The LCDS expires and will need to be renewed. The just transition, the UN's just transition agenda culminates. And depending on your view of things, we're likely to have a change of leadership at the top of Guyana. So in many respects, 2030 is an important year for us as a country. And the idea of this series is to bring together people like yourselves who have stellar histories, who are doing important things in the country, and ask them a little bit about their vision for what Guyana will be, and interrogate them, rather. But many people like yourselves, people don't know. So what we've decided to do is to have a 12 to 15-minute period at the top of the program where you get to tell your story. No editorial. You tell your biopic. You tell us who you are. And then the rest of the 45 minutes, we have persons like myself, who and my co-host this evening, who are representative of Guyana, to interrogate your vision and to tease out some of the more useful and pertinent aspects. And at the end of the program, we'll do an AI summary of the program, and this will be readily distributed. So we're looking to build a database of views and interactions among Guyanese, about Guyanese, for Guyana. And this evening, I'm really delighted to have two co-hosts who over the last few days I've gotten to know, Davina Bagot and Leah Hernandez, and they'll introduce themselves just now. And our choice of co-hosts is very intentional. Lots of times there have been complaints about the particularly male misogynistic profile of not just guests, but hosts. So we intentionally, without apologies, looking to have a profile of hosts who represent Guyana racially, gender-wise, and also in terms of ages and generationally. And they reflect that. Davina, do you want to tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Davina Bagat, and I am a journalist at Kaiser News. I cover mostly oil and gas and politics. I'm really passionate about those two areas because I believe in what it can do for our country. I don't know. You put me on the spot a little bit. I really, I'm used to being the one asking the questions, but I am originally from the Linden Highway, but I now live on the west side. That's all I want to say for now because I really don't want to take up too much time. I'm really looking forward to these discussions.
Thanks for joining us. And Leah?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Miss Leah Hernandez Collymore, and the Miss is very intentional because I am an educator. I teach at the Yarra Primary School. That's along the Linden Highway as well. I am also a former journalist and news anchor. I'm also a wife and a mother, and it is definitely a privilege to be here on this program tonight. So that's all I'll say about myself for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. And I'm Kojo Paris. I am a retired investment banker living between South Africa and Guyana. And together as with my two co-hosts, I think we represent a really balanced portfolio of Guyanese interests. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce to you Ralph Ramkarran. I call him Uncle Ralph. I've known Ralph for nearly 2 decades now. My father introduced me to him and said, "This is an honorable man. We might disagree politically, but this is an honorable man." Ralph, thank you for agreeing to be our inaugural guest.
Thank you.
Ralph, we're going to listen now to your story, Ralph Ramkarran, by Ralph Ramkarran. Devin? And before, Devin, you do that, let me say this. We haven't had much time to prepare this video, so everything that's wrong with it, I take full responsibility for it. But it's an amazing journey through Ralph's life. So Devin, can you share it with us, please?
Hi, I'm Ralph Ramkarran. I was born in 1946 in Bel Air in the eastern part of Georgetown, and I still live there. I have some emotional attachment to Bel Air because my great-great-grandfather and grandmother were bound to Plantation Bel Air as indentured laborers in January 1875. My great-grandfather, grandfather, and father were all born in Bel Air, and so was I. At the time I was born and in decades after, Bel Air had evolved from a sugar plantation into a small farming and working class community. Later, Bookers established a dairy farm which provided employment to some residents. Bel Air consisted of 2 groups of people. Indians were a substantial majority and a minority were Africans. The Indians were largely Hindus with a small Muslim community. I grew up among these communities, which lived in separate sections of Bel Air, but in harmony and mixed freely, especially the young. While there was some tension in the 1960s, peace and harmony generally prevailed. A sign of the enduring nature of these relationships is that when I returned from the UK in 1973, having qualified as a lawyer, Bye Wilson, from one of the long-standing African families, brought me a sheep as a gift out of the respect that he and many other families held for my father. My father was the first in Bel Air and among his family to attend secondary school. He then obtained employment at Transport and Harbors Department, the largest state employer at the time. He became an activist in the 1930s and was a founding executive member of the Transport Workers Union and the chair of its clerical section. His general secretary was Joseph Polydor. My father was one of 3 leaders of the famous Tear Strike in 1949. He had already joined the Political Affairs Committee in 1946 and became an executive member of the PPP when it was formed in 1950. His early mentor in those days was Frank Van Sertima, who was a senior employee at TNHD. Van Sertima held small classes of younger TNHD employees in socialism, trade unionism, and politics. My father contested the 1953 elections on behalf of the PPP. As a candidate, he had to resign his job at TNHD. After the suspension of the elections in 1953, it was a difficult time for our family. My father had no job or income. He was restricted between Kitty and Plaisance and had to report to the Kitty police station every morning. He did not report one day, and the police came for him. He was charged and sentenced to 4 months imprisonment for violating the emergency regulations. He spent the time in Camp Street and Mazaruni prisons. The situation lasted until about 1956. In 1957, elections were held and the PPP won. I was caught up in politics as a teenager and was active in fundraising on various means, such as concerts, dances, nominally on behalf of the PYO, although strict group or party adherence did not exist at the time. But I joined the Bel Air Lilienthal PPP group in 1963. When the PPP lost the elections in 1964, in which I was active as a campaigner and polling agent, direct political activity faded out for me. But I was engaged in all activities in and around Georgetown, and I followed my father everywhere outside of Georgetown in political campaigns. My high school education was obtained from Central High School and Queens College. After high school, I taught at Central High School for a few years and then traveled to the UK to study law. The choice of subject was influenced by my father, who advised me that unless I had a profession which gave me independence, it was unlikely that I would be able to get a job. In the UK, I fell in with Guyanese and UK political activists and spent a great deal of time in political activism, reading politics and following political events. I took part in events and was influenced mainly by the opposition to the Vietnam War, the struggle against apartheid, the civil rights struggle in the US, including the struggle to free Angela Davis, and various events in the United Kingdom. I was an active member of Liberation, the former movement for colonial freedom. I was a member of the Communist Party, but I was not active in that party. But my main political focus was the PPP. My political influences were all from the left, where I have remained anchored politically. As soon as I returned to Guyana in 1963, Janet and I got married after a relationship of 7 years, most of which were spent together in the UK. We delayed our marriage because we wanted to get married at home. Janet started working as a nurse and I became active in politics and began my legal practice. We eventually had 2 sons who were also lawyers. My activism spanned many areas and it coincided with my political work. I had to defend hundreds of political activists from 1973 to 1972 who were charged with criminal offenses. I lectured widely to PPP groups and bodies. I spoke widely at public meetings and other public events. I was the PPP's representative on the Elections Commission for the 1973 elections. The chairman was Sir Donald Jackson, and my opposite number representing the PNC was Sir Lionel Loku. My important positions after that in which I served was a member of the Elections Commission again for the 1992, 1997, and 2001 elections, chairman of the Constitutional Reform Commission in 1999, and Speaker from 2001 to 2011. In my professional life, I left independent private practice and joined the firm of Cameron Shepherd in 1977 after an invitation and an interview. Many were surprised at this alignment with a firm that had a reputation of representing the business community. At that time, the PPP was seen as hostile to business. The main reason I took the offer was that it opened up a high level of legal work that had not been available to me as a young lawyer. I intended to spend 5 years only to pick up valuable experience, but I am still there and as the senior partner over the past 18 years. My political activities continued uninterrupted despite my association with Cameron and Shepherd. I was publicly active in the 3 Arnold Rampersad trials. I was in the Elections Commission in 1991 and thereafter, as I mentioned, and I held political positions. My life experiences, the period of the struggle for democracy and free and fair elections, and developments since 1992, have shaped my personal development and political views. I grew up in a mixed community, and my father helped to form a mixed transport workers union in the 1940s, and he joined a mixed PPP in 1950. My work in the Elections Commission, in the Constitution Reform Commission, and as Speaker required me to work opposite the PNC and to negotiate with them and solve problems. Failing to do so would have resulted in stalemate and deadlock. Discussion and compromise with the opposition were essential features of my work in moving the progress of those bodies forward. Failure to arrive at agreements meant gridlock. For example, failure to arrive at agreement in relation to elections meant elections could not be held. So it was absolutely necessary that discussions and negotiations were successful. I never felt a sense of discomfort in these activities, perhaps because my father had good relationships across the political divide, notwithstanding his fierce opposition to authoritarian rule. The PPP proposed a political solution to the stalemate in Guyana's politics in the late 1970s. The key to the solution was the form of coalition between the PPP and the PNC. It did not succeed at that time or after. The circumstances did change. In the late 1970s, it did not appear that the PPP would win elections anytime soon. After 1992, the tables turned, and it does not now appear as if the opposition will win and sustain itself in office in elections anytime soon. Even though just prior to 1992, Cheddi Jagan confirmed his intention to establish a winner does not take all government, it has not materialized, and Guyana is far away from that as it was in the late 1970s. Guyana's economy will continue to grow, having discovered oil, subject to the problems which will always exist in conditions in oil economies like ours. Guyanese across the board will benefit from this growth, notwithstanding assertions to the contrary. The inexorable economic drive which will intensify the demand for labor and skills will reduce the impact of politically charged allegations. This will inevitably reduce the drive for ethno-political dominance and reduce the challenges to our political stability. My guess is that it is unlikely that ethno-political dominance will emerge in this period as a destabilizing political problem. But the issue will not go away and will continue to influence voting patterns and some of our political engagements. Until a political solution in the sense suggested by Cheddi Jagan from the 1970s until 1992 is devised with the concurrence of the main political forces, this issue in our politics will remain a negative feature. Its resolution will depend not on goodwill, but on whether the political system can withstand the negative stress that is exerted on it by the persistence of a system that relies on ethno-political dominance for success. I do not suggest any particular formula, but if ever there is to be agreement, it will only arrive with intense political effort, wide public demands, and the realization by the major political forces that such an advance is necessary. At this time, the major political parties do not support this step, and there is no national demand or wide political support for a political solution.
Ralph, that was very interesting, but I want to take you back to something you said about the efforts by the PPP and Cheddi Jagan in the late 70s.
Yeah.
And then we skipped over a period to 92.
Yeah.
but I'm aware that in 1985, there was an agreement between the PNC and the PPP, which was about to be signed but thwarted by the death of Forbes Burnham.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, the initiative took place under special circumstances. The economy was tanking, and the IMF conditionalities were rejected by the PNC and Forbes Burnham administration on the ground that they were too onerous. So we believe that the PNC approached the Soviet Union and the socialist countries for assistance. And we believe that he was told that you have to make peace with the PPP before we can give you any assistance. And so he initiated the discussions in 1985. The PPP's position was, we are willing, we are ready, but we want to have first an agreed program that you will implement. And the discussions started on the program. They were not going very fast, but they started, and I think they had about 4 or 5 meetings when they died. I remember Halim Majid of the PNC, who was in the PNC at the time. He was one of the persons who represented the PNC. I can't remember who the others were. I remember on the PPP side, there was Clement Rohi, and I believe Feroz Mohammed, not too sure about Feroz. So they had about 4 meetings, and Burnham died after that. And that was the end of it, how it terminated the discussion.
You know, our next guest will be Vincent Alexander, and I think Vincent might have a slightly different take on it, because there's a view that after Burnham died, of course, Hoyt wasn't particularly enthusiastic about it, but that the PPP was quite keen to continue the process, but there wasn't an agreement between Hoyt and Jagan. There seemed to be some personal enmity between them.
No, the PPP was quite keen to continue the process, and I remember vaguely that they made overtures to Hoyt directly or to his people, but Hoyt made excuses. He made excuses, and then the PPP realized that he was not interested, and it faded out.
Interesting. I'm going to take a back seat now. Davina and Leah, do you want to step in?
Sure, I'd like to jump in if you don't mind. But just before I do, please allow me to say thank you very much again for this opportunity. I believe these discussions are really important to our country's development and future. And just as we have 2 young persons here asking questions, I hope that other persons like myself would be given this opportunity in the future. Allow me to now get into the question segment. Mr. Ramkarran, in the audio, you made the point that Guyana is still far away from materializing Dr. Chetty's vision of a winner does not take all government. Could you elaborate on some evidence of this today?
Well, the initiative for a power sharing arrangement, which is the meaning of winner does not take all, was a power sharing arrangement. And the PPP having won the elections, the initiative would have been on the PPP to initiate a process to bring that about. Now, the circumstances at the time were very difficult, but I don't think that one can make an excuse about difficulty if you're in politics. What were the difficulties? The PPP was in a triumphalist mood, having been out of power for 20 odd years, having won elections. They're looking forward to their people getting employment, getting ministries, getting big jobs and all that kind of stuff. And at the same time, Hoyt was extremely bitter. I think Hoyt expected that he would win the elections in 1992, and he lost it. He was extremely bitter, and no one around at that time entertained any thought that Hoyt would be receptive to a discussion on power sharing. So it was never initiated by the PPP. I blame the PPP because it was our responsibility at the time. But it never came up, and the shocking thing that occurred was that all the people who had supported power sharing and winner does not take all in the late 70s, they all changed their minds. Elections were won in 1992, and they all changed their minds. So no initiative went forward because of neglect, in my view. And that's where it ended. There were subsequent events which gave some hope that something could be resumed. But nothing ever happened. For example, after the 2001 elections, it was a long time after, 9 years, but I think Hoyt realized that this implacable opposition that he had initiated and continued didn't appear to be working. So there were talks between the PNC and the PPP in 2001, but they fizzled out after a while. They had some important discussions. I was on a committee, a border national security committee, and I was a co-chair of that committee, and David Granger was co-chair for the PNC. We had several committees, and both sides had co-chairs. So I was co-chair, David Granger was co-chair for that committee, and we produced a document. David Granger claimed the document as his own when he was president, but it was a document prepared by the committee, and that didn't go anywhere. There were subsequent, even after that, there were discussions with Robert Corbyn when Robert Corbyn became leader. That also didn't go anywhere.
Permit me to follow up. How beneficial for our audience, how beneficial do you believe such an approach would be, especially in the face of another emerging threat to our territorial sovereignty?
I think that it is very important for us to keep that door or window open. The window to a possibility of reconciliation between the two major political forces in Guyana. And therefore, even if this might be a difficult time to envisage any agreement between the two parties, we should continue talking about it, and the forces within the two political parties should be encouraged to keep that door open. And I think it's important that we should continue talking about it. The situation between Venezuela and Guyana the situation is getting very serious. This recent event points to an escalation by Venezuela. There have been escalation after escalation after escalation, and there's a military factor behind it. Not only with this recent incursion, but in the Cuyuni, there have been reports in the press, I think photographed, where on the Ankoko Island they've built a bridge across. They've set up installations. They've stationed troops. So this situation is getting very drastic, and I think we have to consider a higher degree of collaboration. But I always refer to the fact that when the PPP lost the elections in 2015, one of the most baffling events in my political life is the fact that the PPP decided to form the government as a minority government and not expect that the government will fall sooner or later.
I mean, 2011.
In 2011,
The Ramatarga.
the Ramatarga, 2011. The PPP lost completely in 2015. I'm talking about the Ramatar government. So I had been inactive over the election period in politics. And so I wasn't fully aware of the events, but I resumed activity after the government had taken office. And at the first meeting I attended, I inquired whether there was any discourse or discussion within the leadership of the PPP on the question of a coalition government with one or both of the opposition political parties. The answer was no. This is astonishing. I mean, for a person who has been observing the political scene for so long. And the Ramatar government fell as was expected. Now, Ramatar could have been president of Guyana for 10 years. Didn't happen.
Sorry, Davina, as an insider and as someone who understands the PPP, why do you think there wasn't that reach out to the other parties?
I think the people who attained office at that time in 2011, the people who had not attained office, but the people who had emerged in the leadership of the PPP at that time were people who were against shared governance, who were against winner does not take all, and who had no intention of forming any kind of coalition with the PNC. One was with the PNC, a coalition with the PNC. That was ruled out because they didn't want that. The other party was the AFC. They could have formed a coalition with the AFC, coalition government with the AFC. But Nagamoto was the problem then, because Nagamoto had just left the PPP.
Right.
So this was, you would consider that very petty, but that was the real reason, that nobody wanted to sit, that if Nagamoto is nominated as a government, you wouldn't be able to reject him or the coalition would break up. And nobody wanted to sit with Nagamoto.
Davina, you're going to have to indulge me here. So you said that the people who had risen to leadership in the PPP in 2011 didn't have an appetite. They didn't have the Jaganite appetite for shared governance.
Yeah.
Has the profile of that leadership changed?
No.
So it's the same leadership profile from 2011.
It's the same leadership profile. What has happened is that the 2011 group has diminished. Some people have gone off. I have left. Feroz Mohammed is no longer there. Clement Rohi is no longer there. Is no longer active in the leadership. Ramatar is no longer active in the leadership. They are nominal leaders, but their voice is not as strong as it used to be in the past. Now, so that the group that would oppose shared governance has diminished.
Okay.
The people who have taken their place are people who have not built an independent voice.
Okay.
People like Ramatar, Mohammed, Clement Rohi, and myself and others, we built an independent and important voice after years of being in the leadership. The people who are there, the diminishing of our group has resulted in a new level of people who have not reached the status where they can have a big voice in these matters.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Sorry, Davina.
Yes, and I'd actually like to move on, but thank you so much for that explanation, Mr. Ramkarran. Coming back to what you said in your opening commentary about Guyanese being able to benefit from the massive oil discovery in the Stabroek Block, you also highlighted that this would have an impact on the labor market. I wanted to know if you're suggesting, therefore, that citizens are only poised to benefit from the sector through local content opportunities.
No. I not necessarily only local content. The economy is expanding in all kinds of directions, and there in investments outside of the oil industry, all over the place. So what I'm suggesting really is that employers don't have time anymore for employing people on the basis of race. In other words, employees are needed. They're in great demand. Skills are in great demand. So any kind of ethnicity or ethnic prejudice that prevailed in times when there was a lot of available workers no longer exists. That's a natural outcome of economic development. Employers don't have time to determine what race a person is. So I'm saying that the ethnic factor in economic circumstances will decline. And that's a natural outcome of what is going on at the moment. I saw on they say African people are not business oriented. Well, they're historical. They're not that they're not business or I'm saying it is not a question of they're not business oriented, but there are historical factors why you find Indians dominating in the private sector and Africans are more in administration. I don't want to go into that now, but I just want to point out that more and more we're seeing African Guyanese in business. I saw a hydroponic farm. Hydroponic farm. It was highlighted on the news last night. There's an African head of the manager of the farm was a young African guy. He sounded foreign, but I'm not too sure. So there are African Guyanese are now getting into business, not only in employment, in business. But I'm not saying that there is a big solution to the ethnic problem. All I'm saying is, as Guyana develops and grows, this problem will become less. It will not disappear, but it will reduce.
As much as I'd like to continue on the floor, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Leah, if she's ready to go.
Thank you, Davina. So, Mr. Ramkarran, I'm going to start off with a very simple question, and then we'll move on to the others. So, my first question to you is, what role does civic education play in the context of constitutional reform and nation building?
Well, civic education is very important for Guyanese to develop a patriotic outlook. Not only to develop a patriotic outlook, but to develop their personality, civic responsibility, civic duties, civic ideas on how to behave in the community and to develop themselves personally. But civic education is also important in terms of what our Constitution says, what it means. For example, the first part of our Constitution, it's called the Principles and Bases of our Constitution, consists of a lot of statements, a lot of principles and ideas of what Guyana is or should be. For example, it says land to the tiller. It also says Guyana should be a socialist country, but That has been removed, but it's still in the Constitution. But land to the tiller talks about environment. Guyanese are entitled to a clean environment, and a whole host of the Guyanese are entitled to leisure. Guyanese are entitled to peace and harmony. The Guyanese are entitled to employment, and so on. So civic education emphasizes, in relation to the Constitution, emphasizes these things. Very important also is that the Constitution provides for fundamental rights, that from childhood, we should learn that we have rights of free speech. We have rights not to be imprisoned without trial. We have rights, the prisoners have rights. You know, prisoners are sometimes abused, that prisoners have rights, and this kind of things. And these things should be taught from childhood. And once they're taught from childhood and imbued in children from an early age, you get adults, responsible and patriotic adults.
Thank
Leah?
you so much for that answer. Thank you so much for the answer again. Moving on to my second question, same in the constitutional reform area. Can you share some challenges that we should anticipate when implementing constitutional reforms?
A lot of people are not fully appreciative, people in authority, I mean, of the rights of the citizens of Guyana. And therefore, they violate those rights, sometimes unintentionally. That's a difficulty. For example, you would have heard the word legitimate expectation, the phrase legitimate expectation. And it means, and that phrase has grown, has been expanded to higher level of meaning. Legitimate expectation is when somebody is entitled to a right to be heard. You have an employer dismisses an employee of a certain level. That employee has a right to be heard. State employer, not private employer. So, but the employer doesn't know, doesn't realize it, and violates the rights of that person of a certain level who is dismissed without being given a right to be heard. Now that, and many people don't know, sometimes even judges are not all that familiar with the principle. That right to be heard has been advanced to substantive legitimate expectation. So if you are promised something, one lady was promised that she will get a particular place in a hotel. We have moved from the right to be heard to an act. One lady was promised a place in an institution, and she didn't get that place, and that's a substantive right. So it's called substantive legitimate expectation. And people are unfamiliar with those rights. That's just an example, but it has, there are many other areas. Okay. And that is the difficulty that we have. Many times, officials are unaware of the rights of the citizens of the country.
All right. So based on what you just shared, can you say how this can be effectively addressed?
Education. This is normally addressed by court cases. People go to court, courts make a decision, and the authorities learn. But the other way is by constant education. Okay.
Leah, should we, any other questions, or you want to switch back to Davina? Take a break.
Hey. Switch back to the Vita because yes, I'm gonna let my last question sit for a while.
Okay, great. Davina, back to you.
Thank you. I want to bring Mr. Ramkarran back to where I sort of left off, in terms of the oil and gas sector. Um, I want to know whether you believe the terms of the 2016 petroleum agreement is balanced.
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. There's a very big debate going on about it. And I don't know what you mean by balance. I asked Kojo the other day, what is the corporate tax being paid today by businesses who operate in Guyana and make a profit, local or foreign? As far as I'm aware, there are two levels of taxes. 30% for manufacturing businesses and 35% for trading businesses, businesses that don't actually produce anything. In relation to Exxon and the oil companies, they're giving up 50% of what they produce less expensive. So if they were operating as a normal company that came to Guyana, got the right to extract our oil and did so and pay taxes, they'll be paying 30%, but they're in fact paying 50%. Now I quite understand that natural resources have a different arrangement. These arrangements are different. But on the basis of what would normally happen, one cannot say that this is unfair. Now, I do understand the argument, and it has happened in the past, that the royalties are far higher. In that sense, yes, the royalties could have been higher. The government has published draft guidelines for new agreements, and they have put the profit share at 60% rather than 50%. Well, I don't know, that's not a big difference. So it's very difficult to say whether Exxon has put up an argument. They've said, look, this is a new industry in Guyana. And we're taking a very big risk. All kind of risk. There's the risk of Venezuela. Nobody has mentioned that. There's a risk of Venezuela interfering with our production and our assets. So it's not a settled issue. I can't give you an answer whether it's fair or not. I think the argument is still open.
Okay. What are your views on government's decision not to renegotiate the deal, citing sanctity of contract and deterring future investments or investors?
I don't believe those are I don't accept those reasons as reasons. Those are excuses, not reasons. If the government wants to negotiate the contract, renegotiate the contract, it's clear the government has clearly taken a decision not to renegotiate the contract for all kinds of reasons. Now, and they are putting forward these excuses. I don't know of this principle of sanctity of contract. I don't know what it means. People shouldn't break contracts. True, but this is not The people who argue that the contract should be renegotiated are not saying to the government that you should break the contract. That is what sanctity of contract means. If you argue that contracts, there should be sanctity of contracts, you are saying that we should not break a contract unlawfully, without reason, without excuse. Nobody is suggesting that. So that's not a reason. That's not an excuse.
Can I ask you which side of the fence do you sit on? Would you support these calls for a renegotiation of that deal?
I don't know. I have not taken a position on whether there should be renegotiation or not. So I don't know whether that is a position I should take or not. I have not decided whether there should be renegotiation of the contract. So I'm neutral in the
Right.
in the position, in the argument.
Okay. Coming back to what you said about Guyanese being able to benefit and so on from the sector, we often hear Exxon talking about how they've moved really rapidly from exploration to development and so on. But do you think that the sector is moving too fast for Guyanese to benefit?
Well, I really don't. I don't know. I have no idea. From what I've been reading in the papers, the government is interested in Exxon moving fast, and Exxon is interested in moving fast because because of fears that the demand for petroleum products will diminish quite rapidly. They're phasing out gasoline motor vehicles in Europe quite rapidly. So it would seem to me that it is a good idea to push production as fast as possible.
Right. Great. Davina, I wonder if we could ask Leah if she's got any other follow-up questions as we move towards the end. Leah?
I have one more question, and this is as an educator, I would want to ask this question. So, Mr. Ramkarran, very quickly, we know that our economy is rapidly evolving. So, in the context of education and workforce development, how do we prepare our future generations for both the opportunities and challenges of the 21st century or of now and beyond?
Well, spend more money on education, spend as much on education as possible, and stop building wooden schools like Maze, which caught fire today and burnt down to the ground. Build more schools, train more teachers, pay teachers more, encourage. You can't fail if you by spending money on education.
Great. Uncle Ralph, can I take us back to where we started?
Yeah.
And ladies, please jump in if you got any desperate questions you want to ask. We got about 8 more minutes to go. But you know, we started a conversation around issues around governance and particularly shared governance. Help us understand what your definitive position is on shared governance. Tell us in a minute.
Oh, I can tell you in less than a minute. The basic principle is that the government should be shared by in our particular situation, the government should be shared by the 2 main political parties in the proportion of the votes that they obtain at free and fair elections. The party winning the majority of votes should have the position of the head of government, where the president, prime minister, and the party obtaining the second highest number of votes should have the deputy head of government, and they should share the ministry.
Okay, but you don't have a specific formula. The principle is what you're
The
stressing.
principle, I don't have a specific formula, no. That's the principle that I have always known and which I've always supported and support today.
Right. And we've talked a couple of times about the attempt in 2020 by a small group of us to have such an arrangement put into place. What do you think in terms of the coming elections should or might be done pre-elections to enable such an arrangement to occur after the elections?
Well, if there is an arrangement and it's publicly known, and or even if there's an arrangement that is promised by one party, that will go a long way in mitigating the tension over at election time, so that a party knows that it's not losing.
Right.
You know, in Guyana, when you lose the elections, you lose. It's like you really lost something
Right.
very important.
Right.
So if I hardly think that both political parties will be able to come together and have a united position on that. But if we can persuade one political party to say, if I win the election, this is what I will offer to the people of Ghana. The PNC did in 2015.
Right.
They didn't follow it up.
Right.
So,
And I'm often a little puzzled. Are you still a member of the PPP?
no,
You're not a member. Do you think your version of the PPP represents the authentic PPP?
I don't think we can talk in terms of authentic PPP anymore, because the PPP has changed. 1989, when the Soviet Union fell, and socialism was under attack all around the world, that caused a lot of changes in political parties. I mean, the vice president, for example, when he was president, said no. When he was president, touted a market economy. He said, we're building a market economy. That had never been said in the PPP before.
Right.
And as vice president, he said, we are getting rid of all isms. Now, a market economy is capitalism. So getting rid of isms, I don't know what that meant. It certainly didn't mean getting rid of capitalism. What it really means is getting rid of socialism and Marxism and Leninism and that kind of thing. So the PPP is evolving. And I don't know that there's anything one could say about an authentic PPP. The government, I should say, is adopting strong socialist measures in terms of what we understand to be social democracy, spending a great deal on increasing proportions on health, a great deal in increasing proportions on education, a great deal in increasing proportions on welfare, on infrastructure, on building the country and the economy. Those are things that socialist governments do. Those are things that left-wing socialist governments do. And while there are a lot of problems, a lot of criticisms along the way, I think they're on the right track.
Okay. And back to you as a person, what's your biggest regret? I mean, you're seen by some as having been a prince, a princeling of the PPP, and touted often as, the president we never had. What regrets do you have?
I don't know really what regrets. I can't think of any regrets that in that particular period I made some mistakes. I really don't want. I leave that for my memoirs. But in that particular period, from the 1997 to the 2001 period, I could have done things a little bit differently.
Can I probe a little bit? there's a story about you refusing the Attorney General role. Was that one of your mistakes?
That offer was made to me not in 1992. That the Bernard de Santos presented himself as the Attorney General. That offer was made to me in 1997 by the then President Zardeo. I don't even know, it was not an offer made like he called me into his office so that it would be a memorable event.
Right.
So I'm not sure that even he remembered. This was an offer made at an event where there were a lot of people. And I didn't accept the offer because my friend, I was speaker at the time. No, it wouldn't be 1997. It would be 2001. Sorry, 2001. I was speaker 2001.
I don't think you were speaking 2001.
No, it was 2006.
Right.
It was 2006. It was a long time after 1992.
Right.
I declined at that time because Do Not Sing was expecting to be reappointed.
Right.
And Do Not Sing had become a very good friend, and I didn't
Okay.
want to take a position. I knew he expected to be reappointed. And I knew that if I didn't take the position, he would be reappointed. And he was reappointed. So, but, you know, friends have told me that had you gone into the government in any capacity, that would have made a difference.
Right.
But it would have made a difference in 1997, but I didn't.
Well, we always have to wonder, Uncle Ralph. We always have to wonder.
Yeah.
Ladies, any quick fire questions or queries or anything before we go?
If I'm allowed a final question, I'd really love the opportunity.
Sure, please, go ahead, quickly.
Thank you. Mr. Ramkarran, I wanted to know, do you believe our laws are robust enough on punishing government corruption? And can you perhaps give your take on how we can tackle this issue?
Well, I don't think the laws are robust enough, but it's not only a question of laws, it's a question of systems. The procurement system needs reforming in many ways, and the procurement commission needs, the laws need reforming to enable the commission to, remember there was a recent recent decision where the commission said that it couldn't interfere with a contract. It needs, the whole apparatus needs reforming so that these bodies have the power to take decisions, to reject decisions and change contract. For example, you know, they appoint public servants as neutral people to make recommendations to the, what's the body called? I can't remember. It's the government agency that determines contracts. I can't remember the name of it. But they appoint public servants to, but public servants are not the only people in the country. They're private sector people, they're independent people, they're professional people, they're educators, they're journalists. Why can't they be people who monitor these contracts as independent people and make recommendations? So there's a lot of, this system needs reforming.
Right.
Not only a question of laws, the systems need reforming.
Good. Ralph, thank you so much.
Thank you for
You
having
know, it's we could carry on for a while, and I know Davina's got a whole list of questions, but I'm sure we'll get the opportunity to circle back to you. And thanks for having us in your home this evening. It's always a pleasure to chat to you. I want to thank my co-hosts. This has been our first experience, and I want to say to the public out there, that what we're looking to do is to have hosts change from guest to guest. So please write in, please offer yourselves up to come and have these discussions as we go forward. And Leah and Davina, you were stunning. Thank you very much. And Ralph, once again,
Thank you.
continue
Thank you,
the good work. Thank you very much, people. Good night.